Good morning. How we doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I wanted to review the frequency quiz with you. So if you haven't already taken this quiz, please pause this, go take the quiz. I'll leave a link for it in the description box, and then come back and finish the rest of this video. That way you can see how your answers compare not only to everyone else's, but also the correct answers as a whole. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. This is 10 questions, and let's get into the 10 answers you need. Okay, the first question is this. Villain 3-bets a very nitty range of queens plus ace king. How often does he have ace high on a flop of 10-9-4 with a flush draw? Well, 45% of people said that this would happen about half the time, and then the other answers were split between about a third versus 2/3. So which one's correct? Well, if we open up Flopzilla real quick and proof it, we can do this very simply. Plug in queens plus ace king, plug in the board 10-9-4 with a flush draw, and with no blockers or anything like that, we see that ace high is about half the time, right? 47%. Now, you may look at this, and a lot of people maybe don't make this connection right off the bat, but just think about it this way. Queens, kings, and aces collectively is going to be 18 combos. If you don't really know much about combos, I did a full video on that. I'll link that in the description box. Definitely make sure you give that a look if you have no idea what we're talking about in this video. In fact, I might even pause that, watch that first, and it might make a little bit more sense when you take the quiz. And then ace-king collectively, including suited and unsuited combos, is 16. So you have 18 of the queens plus, you have 16 of the ace-king, so about half the time, villain is going to have ace-high on this 10-high board. This is very, very important stuff to understand, especially when you're playing against people that have nitty 3-betting ranges, and when that board comes low and you think that they did in fact 3-bet something like ace-king pre-flop, this really allows you to say, wait, do you only have big hands when you c-bet here, or are there tons of hands that you're either check folding or betting that, of course, my pairs do very, very well against? Moving on to question 2. Villain raises 25% of hands pre-flop and gets 2 callers. If villain would only c-bet top pair plus and open into straight draws on this flop, how often can you expect them to check in this situation? And the flop is queen 9-5 rainbow. So in this situation, we notice that actually 7% of people said about 90% of the time this person's going to check. Well, of course we know that can't possibly be true. There's no way in heck this person's missing that often. And 44% of people say about 70% of the time. So let's see if those people are correct. So moving into Flopzilla, we have the range, we have the board, and if we click all the hand categories that match top pair plus and open it a straight draw, again that was the qualifier, we notice that comes out to about 30%, which means that if they are betting 30% of the time, they are checking 70%. One other thing that you definitely want to carry into this and really make sure you understand is that if they do check, again making the assumption that they're checking pretty much everything that's not top pair plus and open into straight draws, is that most of their checking range is probably going to check fold, right? Or maybe a check calls for one, but it's mostly going to be things like pocket pairs below top pair, middle pairs, weak pairs, and then like ace high and like random stuff. So this is really, really important when you can deduce people that are going to be betting with a very, very static range. When they're checking, they also usually have a pretty static range, and you can definitely use that to your advantage when it comes to creating strategies and lines against them. So if you said about 70% of the time them checking, you are 100% correct, and that's how you then use that to understand their betting and checking ranges and how you can create strategies against both. Onwards to number 3, we have this. Villain opens about 20% of hands pre-flop, and the flop is ace-10-5 rainbow. How often does he flop top pair or better? So about 83% of people said about 25% of the time, and those people are 100% correct in this scenario. So they're going to have top pair about 16, a little bit in sets, a little bit in two pair, all comes out to about 25% of the time. We see that right down here. And this means a couple different things. One, if they're only going to be betting top pair plus, then of course that means they're going to be checking a large chunk. Or if they're going to be c-betting a lot, of course you can't manufacture more strong hands, so the more and more hands they add into their c-betting range, the weaker and weaker they're going to become. Whether that's a middle pair with something like Jack 10, whether that's a gut shot with King Jack, whatever it is, it definitely gives you some information. So it lets you say, okay, how do I think that they're formulating their betting range right this moment based upon how often they're going to flop top pair better, how often do I need to be scared about that, and then what line should you choose based upon that. So it's kind of this push and pull, right? You need the push in terms of understanding how often their range is going to push through various hand categories. And then from that, you're going to pull a strategy and decide, okay, based upon that, here's what I want to do. Here's what my reaction should be. And yes, in this situation, in this entire quiz, we don't have whole cards right now. So we're not exactly talking about our hand versus them. We're just saying, okay, this is how their range is hit. And that frequency information is going to be extremely useful when it comes to crafting the best line possible. In this next situation, we're looking at a preflop scenario. So villain opens 20% of hands preflop, and you think that they would only continue versus your 3-bet with 9s plus, ace queen plus. How often can you expect them to fold to your 3-bet? So this is one of those that kind of proves 3-betting in general and kind of looking for outright profitable situations. If you know how to do this well, I assure you, you can run a lot of very, very easy light 3-bets preflop and take advantage of people who are folding far too often. So just in general, this is something that you should know. So we're just starting with a very, very basic 20% of hands, right? So if they're only going to continue with 9s plus and ace queen plus, plug all that in. Excellent. We see that comes out to 5. So they're continuing 5 over 20, right? Starting with a 20% range, and they're only going to continue with 5. So of that, that means that the rest is going to be folding a lot. So about 3/4 of the time, they're going to fold, just based upon the parameters and the assumptions that we're making right this moment. So how often are they folding? It's about 75% of the time. And only half the people got that right. A large chunk of people really had no idea, obviously half. This is something that you need to know. You need to be able to find players that are folding far too often given the break-even percentage of your 3-bet, and it will allow you to 3-bet them with impunity. And I assure you, it's very, very easy. It's very, very profitable, and it's not difficult math, right? You just say, okay, well, how often are you opening? How often you continue if a 3-bet you? And if that gap is really, really wide, then you should be light 3-betting them a ton of the time. Okay, this next spot, we go back to post-flop, and villain calls your pre-flop raise with a wide range of hands. How often does villain only have 2 overcards on the 7-4 deuce flop? So you notice that this range, yeah, it's going to catch some strong stuff with sets, it's going to catch some straight draws, it's going to catch a couple of overpairs, but more often than not, you're looking at a lot of overcards, right? You're looking at ace 10s and king jacks and queen jacks and jack 10s and all this stuff that's just naked overcards on this board. So 56% of people that took this said it's going to happen about 70% of the time, and you notice that 15% said about 30, which is way too low, and 8% said about 90% of the time, which is far too high. So even if you're just like estimating this, just straight up eyeballing this, you should be at least in the 70 or 50% ballpark. 30 or 90 is just far, far too egregious. And what I really want to highlight here, and I don't mean to cut you down if you got wrong, that's totally okay. But think about it this way. The people that are taking these quizzes are people that study poker to some extent, that have some poker knowledge, that care about improving their game somewhat. And if those people are still about 20% of the time just like way, way off in this scenario, think about the overall player pool. Right? They would have no idea here. And that's really, really important for you to understand because they're not going to be able to gauge, what percentage of your range or what density of your range is going to be naked overcards or anything like that. So it's important to kind of take the big overarching takeaway from this scenario. So in this spot, if we plug everything in, plug in the board of 7-4 deuce rainbow, we notice that just pure overcards is going to be right here at about 70%. And that should be pretty obvious that it's going to be a large chunk, right? I mean, just think about how many combos are going to be like king 10s, right? King 10 offsuit plus king 10 suited, that's 16 combos right there. And then for each of those overcards combos that are unpaired, we're talking more and more and more combos of that, and just so few combinations of monster hands or even just pairs in this scenario. So again, 70% is the correct answer. Congrats if you got that one right. But again, understand just how few people in this game really have any technical understanding of what's going on, especially when it comes to ranges and how they actually hit. Okay, in this next spot, we have villain raising 15% of hands preflop and continuation betting with second pair plus and flush draws on a board of ace 7-3. On the turn, you think they're only going to bet with top pair plus. So how often are they checking the turn? And you notice that the answers are fairly evenly split here at about a third apiece, and the answers being about half the time, about a third of the time, and about 2/3 of the time. So whenever I see that, it just means to me that there's no like definitive answer that the average person feels really comfortable with. So that's that's definitely something that I want to fix for you. And just for the record, that's pretty typical when I do testing with people on turn and river ranges and frequencies in general. So if you can improve on those streets, especially if you're a cash game player where you're going to see more turns and rivers as is, this is definitely going to benefit you in the long run. So pay attention here if you're not 100% sure. So we have this simple situation again, range of about 15% pre. Flop is a 7-3, and this is a two-step problem, meaning that we need to plug in the flop first, and then we need to go to the turn. So if you're not really comfortable with Flopzilla or how the heck to use this or what to do here, I have a full video that I would definitely suggest checking out. Very, very helpful. It's at splitsuit.com/Flopzilla, or you can just click the link in the description box. It'll take you right there. So very, very simple. We're going to plug in the range of the board, all the hand categories that we think he's going to see at the flop with. So again, middle pair plus and flush draws based upon the qualifier that we set. And we're going to tick this green, which now means only those hand categories that we just chose are going to carry over to the next street. The next street is the 7 of diamonds. And you notice here that if we only tick top pair or better, that's about half, which means obviously half of it's going to be top pair plus and the other is going to be not top pair plus. And you notice most of that is going to be flush draws, and then there's going to be a very, very large chunk of pocket pairs below top pair. So kings, queens, pocket eights, all that kind of stuff. And this is really, really helpful when you find players who are continuously using this kind of strategy. You know, bet flops wide, and not that he bet the flop super wide by any stretch, but when they are betting flops wide and only betting turns with like top pair plus, or maybe top pair plus and a couple of flush draws, or a couple of draws, or a couple of bluffs, you notice that a large chunk of the time they're probably going to be checking that turn. And that's definitely something that you can be looking for when you're trying to craft float lines, when you're just trying to figure out what you want to do even from early on and create a profitable plan. This is how you can start thinking about that. When you have this kind of technical understanding, all of a sudden it becomes very, very easy to run a lot of extra lines, especially when it comes to creative stuff on turns and rivers. Okay, in this next spot, we're looking at a 3-bet pot. So you think villain calls your 3-bet with a range of 8s through jacks, ace-jack, ace-queen, and king-queen. You assume villain calls the flop with any pair or flush draw, and the flop is queen 7-6 with a flush draw present. If you bet pot on the turn, and villain only continues with top pair plus and draws, how often can you expect villain to fold? And the turn is a brick 3. So 42% of people said about half the time, and there's a little bit more confidence in that answer than, say, the other one where it was pretty split. So this is good for us to know. Let's see if that's actually the correct answer. And this, again, is going to be another two-step problem in Flopzilla. So range, board, and we're, again, the qualifiers that we thought villain was only going to continue on the flop with any pair and any flush draw. And there's just simply not too many flush draws, of course. There's only ace-jack of diamonds available. So let's plug that in. And you notice here that the only thing that's dumping here when we plug in the pass-through is ace-jack offsuit. Okay, so they're not folding very, very often. Definitely good for us to know, and I'll talk in a moment about how to turn this into an actual strategy. So going into the turn, which is a brick 3 of clubs, we are here. And again, if we think that villain's going to continue with top pair plus and draws, how often can we expect villain to fold here? Well, top pair makes up 49%, flush draws make up 2%, so about half the time is how often we can expect villain to fold. And a couple different things we should be taking away and thinking here. Yes, ranges are very, very narrow, but ranges tend to be very narrow in 3-bet pots, particularly against tighter opponents, so this isn't like that uncommon. Another thing to keep in mind here, if you wanted to quickly estimate this and you're like, how the heck do I think about this in real time? Because that's part of the issue, right? You look at this and we're running it through Flopzilla, and some people will complain, well, I can't use Flopzilla when I'm playing poker. Yeah, no, nobody can. The whole goal is to use this enough that you can develop an intuitive feel for it in real time, and then that you know how to then turn that into a legitimate strategy. So if we're just estimating this, if we're counting combos of, say, ace-queen, right, which is top pair, we thought that wasn't going to fold to a second street. Well, there are 4 unseen aces and 3 unseen queens. So in that scenario, there's 12 combinations of ace-queen, another 12 for king-queen, same logic and rationale. So there's 24 combos total of top pair. Now for 8s through jacks, there's 6 of each. Again, there's no blockers in here that are messing with things. So there's 24 combos of 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks. So comparatively, you should be able to see, like, assuming you think that pocket pairs below top pair, so 8s through jacks are going to fold against a bet, it's pretty easy to see that about half the range is going to fold. And ranges do get this narrow in 3-bet pots, so this is not like some egregious, outlandish example. Of course, if you disagree or you thought your opponent would call with a different range preflop, that's totally good. Plug it all in, see what really happens here. So one quick thing to point out just from a strategic point of view, and I know these videos sometimes get a little long because I get a little strat heavy, but I think it's really important that we don't just understand the frequency part, but also how to start turning that into a legitimate strategy, is we notice that back on the flop, villain is only folding 25% of the time. So if you were sitting here with like ace-king on this board, again, understand that you're probably not generating very many folds against that range. Okay, but if you're not generating folds right at that moment, it doesn't mean that you don't bluff. It just means that you have to start thinking about future streets. So if the turn bricks off like it did here, can you generate enough folds? Now, if you're potting it, you need villain to fold significantly more often than if you were to fire for like half pot. So my question, if I was trying to create an entire strategy here, say, okay, on the flop, I think I'm getting X hands to fold, so about 25% of the time. If the turn comes off, could I get pocket tens to relinquish if I bet, half or 2/3 pots? If so, I'm expecting folds about half the time, but if I only require folds about 40, awesome, then I'm making profit there. So that's how you can start crafting an entire strategy, looking at an entire range and entire action base, and start figuring out what you should be doing in these scenarios. This information, the frequency stuff, is a starting point. It's not the end all be all, right? You need to know how to turn frequencies into legitimate strategy, but this is the building block. This is how you can start thinking, okay, based upon these frequencies, based upon how I think my opponent's going to play now and later, now I can start crafting some pretty sweet lines. Alright, this next one we're looking at a check raise situation. So, villain raises 15% of hands preflop and c-bets his entire range. If you check raise and he only continues with top pair plus and flush draws, so big hands on a king 9-3 with a flush draw board, how often can you expect him to fold? And this is just something, again, when you're starting to look at creating a bluff strategy, this is a really good starting point. Looking at frequencies, seeing how often people are actually going to hit that fold button, and then applying the pressure when that's actually going to be the case. So in this situation, 52% of people said about 2/3 of the time, and you notice again that 12% of people said about 90%. Of course, we should never expect that this person, just at a broad, very, very broad strokes glance, should never expect that someone's going to be folding 90% of the time here, right? How could that possibly be possible given just the general stuff of top pair plus and flush draws? You're saying that they only have that 10% of the time here? No, that's definitely not going to be the case. So let's plug everything into Flopzilla and just see what's going on here. So again, 15% range preflop, flop of king 9-3 with a flush draw, assuming c-bets everything, and for some players that's true, for other players maybe it's not so true, but once you understand this stuff, it really helps give you the starting point. So the way to solve this in Flopzilla would be to say, okay, I'm going to plug in top pair plus, so top pair, over pairs, sets, all that kind of stuff, and then also flush draws because that was the qualifier we used, which of course means that when we check raise, we're assuming things like pocket tens, pocket sevens, and ace 10 nothing all go away. And if that's the case, cool. Then we notice that they have that 1/3 of the time, which of course means that they're folding 2/3 of the time. So the 52% of people that said that, high five, you got the right answer, great job. If you said about 90% of the time and you were serious, you got a little bit of work to do with your frequency stuff. And that's totally okay. We all start from scratch at some point. It's just time to start putting in that work and start making sure you understand these things more consistently. And just in general, that should make a lot of sense, right? So the easy way to start calculating this stuff is off table when you're exploring these spots. Get used to combo counting quickly. And again, I've talked about combo counting before. There's a video in the description box if you want to click the link for that and start understanding this stuff at a deeper level. And I also have another quiz that's all about that as well. This is something that you want to know. So again, no blockers are here because we don't know what our whole cards are, but looking at this, right, there's 12 combinations of every top pair, right? There's 3 unseen kings, 4 unseen aces, multiply it together, that's 12. So 12 combos of ace king, 12 of king queen, 12 of king jack. Cool. So all that together is 36 combinations of top pair given the range that we assigned pre. There are, of course, some combinations of sets between kings, nines, and threes. So again, we're up to like 45-ish. Throw in some flush draw combinations, and we're up to about 50. Well, Villain started with about 180 combos in the pre-flop range, so we see that that's give or take around a third of the range is going to be continuing. This is all ballpark. This is all just quick estimates and combo counting and doing a little bit of multiplication, but this is the starting point, right? Because when you can identify this spot and say, wait, Villain's going to fold 2/3 of the time when I check raise. Okay, well, we're making some assumptions about ranges, and is he really going to fold, something like pocket tens, yes or no? But if yes, I mean, this is a spot where you should just be able to identify it quickly. And by analyzing this stuff off table, it will become second nature, and you'll be able to find more bluff opportunities in real time. All right, this next one we're going to look at draws real quick. So Villain steals with a wide range of hands pre-flop. How often do they flop a gut shot or better draw? So again, wide range of hands, king jack 8 with a flush draw on the king and jack on the board. So what are we looking at here? Well, this is one where about half of people said about 20% of the time, and then the rest ranged very, very widely. And one thing that I really want to clear up is, if you said 20 or 35, 35 is high and it's definitely not correct, but at least you're in a ballpark. But these people that are saying like 50% or more, this again is almost 1 in 5 people that fill this out. And these are people that study the game to some extent and care about playing at least slightly better poker. They still think that draws are making up a super, super wide range. So if you're looking at that in terms of like players who don't study at all, it's not going to be uncommon to see people that just have no concept whatsoever of how often draws are really, really present here. And this is why when you see all those people that like panic incorrectly about draws, well, this is why. So in this scenario, again, plug in the range, plug in the board, and if we're only looking at gut shots, open-ended straight draws, and flush draws, again, that was the qualifier, about 20% of the time here. And this is not too uncommon, to be totally honest. This is definitely something that you want to be well aware of. So in general, draws obviously do not dominate the overall range density. There's a decent chunk of them, but they don't dominate by any stretch of the imagination. So if you're one of those people that like overly panics about flush draws and stuff, you can stop panicking about that. If you're overly panicked about draws, yeah, draws are in there. Yes, draws make up some percentage of an overall range. Yes, if you bet and your opponent's going to be folding some chunk of stuff, draws will make up larger and larger densities, but they rarely dominate a range density. So please keep that in mind before you panic about a draw next time. All right, this final hand, we have this. Villain calls your 3-bet with 1/3 of their 30% opening range. So 10% of hands, and we're going to build it with 5s through jacks, some double broadways, and we're going to remove things like queens plus, ace queen suited plus, assuming that they would have 4-bet with that and not flatted it. So if they fold everything but second pair or better to your pot size c-bet, how often can you expect them to fold? And again, the board is ace, queen, deuce, rainbow. So in this scenario, we notice that, again, 15% of people said they're going to be folding 85% of the time. I mean, there's just no way in heck that can possibly be true here, right? Even just doing a raw glance at this, there's just no way that only 15% of the time this person is catching second pair or better. There's just no possible way. It doesn't make any sense at first glance. And of course, when we get the actual answer from Flopzilla, we can definitely prove that for sure, right? So making the assumption that they're continuing with middle pair or better, so a queen X plus, we notice that they're doing that about 42% of the time. So of course, the actual answer is about 60% of the time they're going to be folding, right? If they catch about 40, they miss about 60. Pretty simple. So again, the major thing here is, one, is the original assumption correct in terms of the range? We're not going to go into hand reading in this video, but definitely something to consider. The other thing is your assumption here correct in terms of, are they folding everything but second pair or better to your potter? If yes, cool, then it's very easy. But if you think they're going to start continuing with some or all of those weak pairs, now all of a sudden continuance can go very high, up to as high as roughly 80% here. So definitely make sure you're keeping those kind of things in mind. And that's before we even discuss things like gut shots, etc. But these are the things to keep in mind, and also just understand, again, your bet size is going to influence what kind of hands will or will not continue. The elasticity of your opponent is definitely going to influence that too. But if you can understand these raw breakdowns, right? What percentage of a range is top pair? What percentage is middle pair or better? What percentage is draws? It really helps you formulate a plan, one, on that street, but also two, on future streets. And that's really, really helpful when it comes to creating an overall strategy. And I get it, this quiz is not super simple. And if you did it without software, honestly, high five, especially if you performed really, really well on this. This is stuff that for the average person, they've never even thought about. So doing it with the software a couple of times is definitely the way to go. Just so you could start building some intuition here, being able to quickly estimate. And one cool thing in Flopzilla is that if you hit the tab key, you will go into combo mode. And this is really useful for highlighting or hovering over like weak pairs and saying, okay, there's 42 combos of weak pairs. Well, based upon like the overall percentage of hands that get here, we should see that that's a pretty large chunk, right? And then of course there's going to be some king jack, some king 10, some jack 10 suited. And if we think they're folding gut shots to the fire, it's pretty easy to see that a large chunk of that range, or at least more than half, is going to be dumping because, of course, it's just these kind of hands. So again, this is all stuff that takes a bunch of time, takes a bunch of practice, and you do not use Flopzilla when you're actually playing poker. This is all stuff you do in your study time off table, but I assure you, if you put in the time, put in the effort with it, it is going to be a huge starting point for being able to more correctly say, okay, here's the range I think my opponent has, and then based upon that, this is how it hits, this is how it misses, and then this is how I can start turning that information into a legitimate strategy. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed the quiz. If this challenged you, consider that a really, really good thing. This may show you some places that you need to put in some extra off-table study and work. Or this may just say, okay, from this video alone, I'm able to more correctly understand some general frequencies and then start using that in your own games. Now again, I've mentioned multiple times, the frequencies are one thing, but turning them into a strategy is a whole nother thing. And I actually created an entire free webinar for that to show you exactly 5 of the major ways that I turn frequencies into actual lines and strategy. If you're interested in signing up for it, again, totally free. It runs totally on demand and auto. Just go to splitsuit.com/frequency. Again, splitsuit.com/frequency. I'll also leave a link in the description box, but definitely check that out if you're curious in how the heck do you actually put this information to real use. Trust me, that's going to be a webinar that's going to be right up your alley. So again, thank you so much for hanging out today. I really appreciate it. Again, check out the webinar if you're interested in going a step deeper. And as always, I'll see you back soon with a brand new video. Good luck out there and happy grinding.